I still remember the taste of the recaf that morning, bitter as promethium waste, the way it burned my throat in the observation deck of the Eternal Credence. I was a mid-tier lexographer then, 43 years into my service aboard the Void ship, my spine already curved from decades bent over data slates, my eyes permanently bloodshot from the flickering green phosphor of ancient cogitators. The ship's chronicler had died 3 weeks prior, found in his quarters with every blood vessel in his eyes burst, his face locked in an expression that the Medicae servitors classified as incompatible with standard human musculature. They'd promoted me to replace him. It felt like an honor. I was a fool. The temperature in that observation deck was always wrong. Always had been in my 4 decades of service. Some fault in the environmental systems that no tech priest had ever prioritized. That morning it was cold enough that my breath misted, cold enough that I wore my regulation greatcoat, even though dress codes were supposed to be maintained. Through the armor-glass viewport, I could see the Mandeville Point approach, that invisible threshold where reality and unreality traded places, where ships could claw their way into the warp. Standard transit. We'd done it 10,000 times before. The Vox was quiet, except for the usual litany of prayers, the endless benedictions to the machine god and the emperor, the rhythmic chanting that was supposed to soothe the ship's machine spirit. I was supposed to be logging astropathic communications, maintaining the official chronicle of our journey from the forge world of Metallicus to the shrine world of St. Margot's Repose. Cargo manifests, passenger lists, the bureaucratic architecture of the Imperium, endless and self-replicating. Then the astropath started screaming. Not the normal screaming every voidsman knows that astropaths sometimes cry out during their sendings, that communion with the Astronomicon takes its toll. This was different. This was a sound I'd never heard from a human throat, a sustained note that seemed to vibrate through the deck plating itself, that made my teeth ache and my vision swim. The Vox channels erupted into chaos, bridge officers barking orders, tech priests chanting overrides, the master of Auspex reporting impossible readings, and beneath it all, that screaming, that endless screaming that seemed to be coming from every speaker, every Vox bead, every metal surface capable of resonance. I should have stayed at my post. Regulations were clear. But something in that scream pulled at me, hooked into something behind my sternum, and yanked. I found myself moving through the corridors, my data slate forgotten, following that sound like a pilgrim follows the light of the Astronomicon. The temperature was dropping as I went deeper into the ship, my breath now coming in thick clouds, frost forming on the Gothic archways and iron bulkheads. Other crew members were emerging from their stations, all of us drawn by the same incomprehensible compulsion. Nobody spoke. The screaming had evolved into words, but words in no language I recognized, syllables that seemed to bypass my ears entirely and inscribe themselves directly onto my brain. The astropathic choir chamber was never meant for unauthorized personnel. I knew this. Everyone knew this. The doors were 3 feet of blessed adamantium, sealed with 17 different locks and warded with prayers that tech priests renewed weekly. But when we all arrived, perhaps 30 of us drawn from across the ship, the doors stood open. Not broken, not forced, simply open, as if they'd never been sealed at all. The temperature beyond was arctic. I could see ice crystals forming in the air itself, could feel my lungs burning with each breath. Inside, the astropaths were convulsing in their restraint thrones, their eyeless sockets weeping frozen tears, their mouths opening and closing in unison. But they weren't the source of the screaming anymore. That was coming from the Astronomicon relay itself, the sacred device that maintained our connection to Holy Terra, to the Emperor's light. It was burning with a light that wasn't light, a brightness that somehow made the chamber darker, that cast shadows in directions that had no relationship to where the illumination originated. And in those shadows, in that impossible darkness within brightness, I saw something that I have spent every day since trying to forget. A figure, massive beyond comprehension, tall enough that its head should have struck the vaulted ceiling but somehow didn't, broad enough that it should have been pressed against the walls but wasn't. The space around it seemed to fold, to accommodate impossibilities. I couldn't see details, my eyes refused to focus, sliding off the figure like oil off blessed adamantium, but I could sense attributes. Authority that made the ship's captain seem like a deck swabber, power that made our plasma drive seem like candle flames, and most terrifying of all, recognition, as if this thing knew us, as if it had been waiting for us specifically, as if our small, insignificant void ship had been selected from among billions for some purpose we couldn't begin to fathom. One of the astropaths, the choir mistress, I think, though the ice made identification difficult, managed to form coherent words through her convulsions. He returns, the 13th, the hope. The Primarch walks among, and then her head exploded. Not metaphorically. Her skull simply came apart, the contents flash frozen and then vaporized, her body continuing to thrash for several seconds before the restraints held it still. The other astropaths followed within heartbeats, each one managing a few more words before their deaths. Guilliman. Risen. The Imperium transformed. Everything changes. Nothing changes. Hope. Doom. The figure in the shadows regarded us. Then I knew it was regarding us, though it had no eyes I could perceive, no face I could comprehend, and when it spoke, the voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It came from the deck plating and the walls and the frozen air itself. It came from inside my own chest cavity, resonating through ribs and organs. Bear witness, it said, and the words were simultaneously High Gothic and Low Gothic, and the debased frontier dialects and languages that had been dead for 10,000 years. Bear witness to what comes, to what has always been coming, to what can never be stopped. I don't remember fleeing. I don't remember returning to my quarters, but I woke 3 days later in the Medicae Bay with no memory of the intervening time. Frost damage on my extremities severe enough that they'd replaced 2 of my fingers with crude augmetics. The official report stated that there had been a catastrophic failure in the astropathic chamber's environmental controls, that the entire choir had perished in the incident, that 30 crew members had suffered exposure-related injuries. The chamber itself was sealed, blessed, and declared off-limits pending investigation by the nearest inquisitorial authority. But here's what they didn't put in the official report. Every single one of us who had been in that chamber, who had seen what I'd seen, we all began to dream the same dream, every night, without fail. In the dream, we stand on a world we don't recognize, beneath a sky that's the wrong color, not the purple-black of void transit or the smog-yellow of hive cities, but a clear, painful blue that makes our eyes water. And across a vast plaza we see him, the figure from the chamber, but now solid, now real, now rendered in flesh and ceramite and gold, a giant among giants, surrounded by warriors in blue armor, their bolters raised in salute. And across the Imperium, across billions of worlds and countless void ships and infinite stations, people are celebrating, people are weeping with joy. The Primarch has returned. Hope has been restored. The Imperium is saved. But in the dream, we see something else. We see what no one else sees. Behind the Primarch's eyes, behind that ancient, perfect face, there is something looking back at us, something that remembers us specifically, something that has plans that stretch across millennia, and the hope that everyone else feels, that cosmic wave of relief and renewal, it curdles in our throats like spoiled milk, because we understand, in that moment, that hope itself has become another form of control, that salvation is just another cage, that what everyone interprets as deliverance is actually the closing of a trap that's been 10,000 years in the making. I need you to understand. I wanted to believe. Emperor knows. I wanted to believe it was real hope, real salvation, but I couldn't escape the memory of that voice saying, bear witness, not rejoice or be saved or even fear, bear witness, as if we were being appointed to some function, given some terrible responsibility that we never asked for and could never refuse. The Time's eternal credence Times completed its journey to St. Margot's repose, without further incident. We were all quietly reassigned, not together, never together, but scattered across the sector like seeds on dead soil. I was transferred to an administrative position on the Shrine World itself, a promotion that felt like a punishment, given an office in the Cathedral of the Bleeding Heart where I was to maintain records of pilgrimage traffic. The work was mind-numbing. Exactly the kind of bureaucratic tedium I'd spent 4 decades perfecting. But I couldn't focus. Because the dreams continued, and because I started noticing things, small things at first, inconsistencies in the astropathic communications that filtered through official channels, reports that would arrive and then be retroactively unwritten, messages that existed in my morning briefings but had vanished by afternoon, references to the returned, or the avenging sun, that appeared in documents and then dissolved like morning frost. I began keeping a private log, hidden in a false compartment beneath my quarters floor plating, documenting everything I noticed. Within 3 months, I had 17 separate instances of information that should have existed but didn't, of historical records that had been altered without official revision markers, of timelines that contradicted themselves in ways that made my head ache to consider. The pilgrims came in their millions to St. Margot's repose, as they always had. But their prayers were changing. I noticed it in the transcription requests, in the official recordings of mass observances that my office was required to maintain. Where once they had prayed for the Emperor's distant mercy, for the cold mathematics of salvation through suffering, now they prayed for something immediate, for intervention, for rescue, for a hero to save them from the darkness. Let him return, they whispered in the confession booths. Let the sons of the Emperor walk among us again. Let the legends become real. But what if the legends were never meant to become real? What if they functioned precisely because they remained legends, distant and perfect and unattainable? What if the actual return of the demigods would break something fundamental in the machinery of the Imperium, some careful balance that had been maintained through 10,000 years of calculated dysfunction? These were dangerous thoughts, heretical thoughts. I tried to suppress them, to lose myself in the comforting rituals of data entry and record-keeping. But the dreams wouldn't stop, and 6 months after my transfer, I received a visitor. He arrived at my office without announcement, materializing in the chair across from my desk, as if he'd always been there, as if reality had simply forgotten he was absent and corrected itself. He wore the black of the Inquisition, but with no rosette, no visible authority beyond his presence itself. His face was forgettable, deliberately so, I realized, designed to slide out of memory the moment you looked away. His eyes were not forgettable. They were the color of frozen void, and when they fixed on me, I felt like a specimen prepared for dissection. "Lexographer Hadrian Voss," he said, and my name in his mouth sounded like an indictment. "You've been having dreams." It wasn't a question. I didn't bother to deny it. "Yes, so have the others, all 30 of you." He leaned forward, and the temperature in my office dropped 10 degrees. "Tell me what you saw in the astropathic chamber. Tell me everything, and omit no detail, no matter how trivial it seems." So I told him. "Emperor, help me." I told him everything. The figure in the shadows, the voice that came from everywhere, the specific words, "Bear witness." The dreams that followed, the sense of wrongness beneath the hope. As I spoke, he never moved, never blinked, just watched me with those terrible frozen eyes. When I finished, the silence stretched so long that I wondered if he'd somehow left without me noticing. Then he smiled. It was worse than if he'd shown anger or contempt. The smile suggested that I'd confirmed something he'd already known, something he'd been testing for, and I'd failed the test in a way that couldn't be remedied. "You want to know what you saw," he said. It wasn't a question. "You want me to explain it, to give you context that will make it make sense, to tell you whether it was real or some warp-born hallucination, whether the Primarch truly returns, or whether you witnessed a lie designed to destabilize the Imperium." "Yes," I whispered. "I cannot tell you," he said, "because I do not know, and that is what terrifies me." He stood, and the movement seemed to take minutes despite lasting only seconds. a temporal dislocation that made my vision swim. But I can tell you this. You and the others have been marked, singled out. You were shown something for a reason, and that reason is not mercy. When the truth finally reveals itself, if it reveals itself, you will be positioned to witness it. This is not a gift. This is a burden that will break most of you. Some have already broken. How many? I asked. Of the 30 who were in that chamber. 7 are dead. Suicides officially, though the circumstances suggest they were helped along. 8 have disappeared, transferred to locations that don't exist according to any records I can access. 3 are in the care of the Ministorum, declared mad and dangerous to themselves. The remaining 12, including you, continue to function, continue to dream, continue to wait. He moved toward the door, then paused. There is a choice coming, lexographer Voss. When it arrives, you will know it, and you will have to decide whether to bear witness honestly or to lie for the sake of the species. Both choices will destroy you, but one of them might serve something larger than your own survival. Then, he was gone, and I was alone in my office, with the temperature slowly returning to normal, and the taste of metal in my mouth. That was 3 years ago. In those 3 years, the dreams have intensified. Every night, that blue sky, and that massive figure, and the sense of wrongness, wrapped in celebration. But the dream has started to include more, details that feel less like imagination, and more like transmission. I see specific dates in low Gothic numeration. I see locations, worlds I recognize from astrocartographic records. I see the Primarch speaking to assembled crowds, his words echoing across Vox networks, and the words themselves burn into my memory. I am returned to shepherd you into a new age of reason. But beneath the words I hear the other voice, the one from the chamber. Bear witness to what comes. The other survivors, the ones still alive and functional, we found each other despite the Imperium's efforts to keep us separated. Not through any official channels, but through the dreams themselves. We recognize each other somehow, can sense the mark we share. There are 9 of us left now. We meet in secret, in the forgotten spaces of St. Margot's cathedral city, in the catacombs where the ancient dead outnumber the living 10,000 to 1. We've pooled our observations, our documentation, our desperate attempts to understand what was done to us. What we've discovered is this. The astropathic event on the Times Eternal Credence Times was not unique. It was one of hundreds, perhaps thousands, occurring across the Imperium in a synchronized pattern. Void ships, stations, hive cities, forge worlds, all experiencing the same catastrophic failure, the same vision, the same message. Bear witness. And in each case, survivors were marked as we were marked, set aside for some function we couldn't name. But here's what makes us wake screaming. What makes 3 of our number choose the mercy of suicide rather than continue. We think we understand the function now. We think we know what we're being prepared to witness. The Primarch's return, if it comes. When it comes, it won't be a simple restoration. It can't be. The Imperium has spent 10,000 years becoming what it is. A vast, grinding machinery of oppression and survival, of cruelty justified by necessity, of suffering elevated to religious principle. The Primarchs were built for a different Imperium, for a different vision of humanity's future. One that failed. One that burned in the fires of the Horus heresy and the millennia of darkness that followed. So what happens when you insert that old vision into the new reality? What happens when you try to graft hope onto a structure built entirely on despair? What happens when you promise salvation to people who have been taught that salvation is heresy, that suffering is virtue, that the only dignity lies in dying for an emperor who has been silent for 10,000 years? I think we were shown a preview. I think the figure in that chamber was ascending, a projection, a test, and I think it was asking, can you handle this? Can you witness the transformation without breaking? Can you maintain your sanity when everything you've been taught inverts itself? The answer for most people will be no. I've been analyzing historical records, looking for patterns in previous moments of great change in the Imperium's history. The integration of new technologies, the suppression of old heresies, the founding of Space Marine chapters, and the destruction of others. Every transformation, no matter how necessary, has been purchased with oceans of blood. The Imperium doesn't evolve. It hemorrhages, and then scabs over, always leaving scars, always losing something essential in the exchange. What happens when the transformation isn't technological or administrative, but foundational? What happens when the very mythology that holds the Imperium together is challenged by the return of the myths made flesh? 6 months ago, we received confirmation. Not through official channels, those remain carefully sanitized, empty of anything that might suggest the Imperium is anything other than eternal and unchanging, but through the underground networks, through the whispers of pilgrim ships and the coded messages of rogue traders, through the dreams that have become almost unbearable in their clarity. Ultramar is awake. The realm of Ultramar, that legendary domain of the 13th Legion, is mobilizing. And at its head, a figure in blue and gold, whose description matches the thing we saw in the chamber exactly. The official response has been silence, not denial, but absence, as if acknowledging it would make it real, would force the Imperium to confront questions it's not equipped to answer. But you can't hide a Primarch. You can't pretend that a demigod walking among men is just another administrative detail. The silence itself is a kind of answer, and it's the most terrifying answer possible, because it means they don't know what to do either. The Inquisitor returned last week. This time he wasn't alone. He brought with him a woman in the red robes of the Mechanicus, her face half hidden behind augmetic implants, her eyes replaced with sensor arrays that clicked and whirred as they scanned me, and a third figure, hooded and silent, whose presence made the air in my office feel pressurized, as if reality itself was uncomfortable with their existence. "It's confirmed," the Inquisitor said without preamble. Rabute Guilliman lives. The Primarch has awakened after 10,000 years. The Imperium of man stands at a threshold that no living soul was prepared to cross. "What do you need from us?" I asked, because I knew now that we'd been preserved for a reason, that our suffering had been calculated, that we were components in some larger machine whose function was only now becoming clear. The woman in red answered, her voice modulated by Vox synthesizers into something that barely sounded human. "Documentation. Observation. Recording. You have been marked by the warp echo of his return, by the psychic shockwave of a demigod re-entering reality. This makes you uniquely positioned to perceive what others cannot, to see the discontinuities, the contradictions, the places where the myth and the reality fail to align. You want us to spy on a Primarch?" The absurdity of it made me laugh, a sharp, barking sound that echoed off the stone walls of my office. "We're lexigraphers and deck officers and menial functionaries. We're nothing. What could we possibly observe that the Inquisition itself couldn't?" The hooded figure spoke then, and its voice was worse than the Inquisitor's had ever been, worse than anything in my dreams. It was the sound of stars dying, of civilizations ending, of hope being methodically extinguished across cosmic timescales. "You can see him as he is, not as he needs to be. The Imperium requires the Primarch to be salvation incarnate. The Ecclesiarchy requires him to be a living saint. The Administratum requires him to be a tool of stability. The High Lords require him to be controllable. But you who were marked, you will see the truth that exists beneath all those requirements, and you will document it." "Why?" I asked. "What's the point? If he's returned, if he's real, what difference does our documentation make? What difference do we make?" The Inquisitor smiled again, that terrible smile. "Because if the truth is too divergent from what the Imperium needs it to be, then your documentation will form the basis of the first and greatest lie of the new age. The lie that will hold the Imperium together while the Primarchs tears apart 10,000 years of carefully maintained decay. Your witnessing will be inverted, made into its opposite, and you will become the foundation of a new mythology that has nothing to do with what you actually saw." He leaned close, and I could smell the chemicals on his breath, the preservatives and stimulants that kept him functional, despite flesh that should have failed decades ago. You asked why you were chosen. This is why. Because you are credible enough to be believed but insignificant enough to be erased. Your truth will become our lie, and you will spend the rest of your lives knowing that your honesty was the instrument of the greatest deception in Imperial history. They left me with instructions, coordinates, protocols, ways to transmit information through channels that theoretically don't exist, to organizations that theoretically don't operate outside inquisitorial oversight. They gave me 30 days to put my affairs in order, to make whatever peace I could with the life I was leaving behind. Then, I was to report to a shuttle pad on the outskirts of St. Margot's Cathedral City, where I would be transported to a location they wouldn't specify to fulfill a function they wouldn't define. 27 days have passed now. The dreams have changed. The figure in blue and gold no longer stands triumphant before celebrating crowds. Now he's alone, in a vast chamber that might be throne room or prison cell, and he's looking directly at me, at us, at the marked ones who were chosen to bear witness, and the expression on that ancient, perfect face is not hope or determination or the confidence of a demigod reborn. It's something I've seen before, in the mirrors of 100 different void ships and stations, in the faces of men and women who've served the Imperium too long and understood too much. It's exhaustion. Bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion. The look of someone who's been given an impossible task and knows they'll fail, but is too honorable, or too stubborn, or too broken to refuse. In the dream, the Primarch speaks, and his words are meant only for us. I have been shown what the Imperium has become. I have been shown what my father's vision devolved into, what my brother's failures birthed. I return to a hell of our own making, to an empire that worships death and calls it virtue, that has elevated suffering to religious principle, and I am expected to save this, to redeem this, to somehow restore something that was poisonous from its inception. He pauses, and the weight of 10,000 years presses down on that pause, fills it with implications I can barely comprehend. I will try, he says, because trying is the only dignity left to me. But I need witnesses to what I actually attempt, not to what the propagandists will claim I achieved. I need honest eyes to document the truth, even if that truth is my failure, even if that truth is that salvation itself was always a lie, and all I bring is a new flavor of damnation. Then he looks past me, at something I can't see, and his expression shifts into the mask of confidence and determination that I recognize from 1,000,000 pieces of propaganda, from 10,000 years of Imperial mythology, the mask that will convince billions that hope is real, that salvation is possible, that a Primarch's return changes everything. Bear witness, he says one final time, and when you do, remember, the truth of what you see matters less than what the Imperium needs to believe you saw. This is the burden I give you. This is the sin I require you to commit. Tell the lie that saves them, or tell the truth that damns us all. I wake from this dream sweating despite the cold, my augmetic fingers clenching into fists that won't unclench, my heart hammering against ribs that feel too fragile to contain it. The other marked ones report the same dream, transmitted across whatever psychic channel was burned into us 3 years ago. We are being prepared, instructed, conscripted into a conspiracy that involves the Inquisition and perhaps the Primarch himself, that requires us to become either liars or martyrs or both. 3 days remain before I must report to the shuttle pad. I've been finalizing my affairs, as instructed, transferring responsibilities, encoding messages that will be transmitted to dead drop locations if I fail to check in at designated intervals, destroying documents that might implicate others in my investigations, the administrative work of erasure, of preparing to disappear into whatever machinery the Inquisition has constructed for those who witness what shouldn't be witnessed. But I've also been writing this chronicle, this confession, not through official channels, not in any form that the Inquisition or the Administratum could access or edit. I've been using a pre-imperial printing press I found in the cathedral city's underhive, a relic from before the unification of Terra, before the Emperor's rise. I've been setting physical type lead letters that can't be digitally edited, can't be remotely erased, can't be retroactively unwritten by the scribes of the administratum. I've printed 1,000 copies of this account, hidden them in 1,000 different locations across St. Margot's repose, in places where pilgrims might find them, where the curious might stumble upon them, where the truth might survive even if I don't, because I've made my choice. When I stand before the Primarch, if I stand before the Primarch, I will not lie. I will document what I see exactly as I see it, without regard for what the Imperium needs to believe, without concern for what the Inquisition expects me to report. I will be the witness I was marked to be, the honest chronicler in an empire of lies. This will likely kill me. The Inquisitor made that clear enough. But I've spent 46 years serving the Imperium's bureaucratic machinery, documenting its endless self-replication, maintaining its careful fictions. I will not spend my final years doing the same thing with a Primarch's return. I will not let my witness become another tool of oppression, another instrument of the great lie that holds the Imperium together. If the Primarch brings hope, I will document it. If he brings new horrors, I will document that too. And if he brings something more complex, more ambiguous, more human than the mythology can accommodate, then that complexity will be my legacy. Not the sanitized version, not the propaganda, the truth. Even if the truth is that there is no salvation, that the Primarch is just another component in the machinery of suffering, that his return changes nothing fundamental about the Imperium's nature. Even if the truth is that hope itself is the cruelest lie, because it makes the suffering bearable enough to continue. I think about the astropaths on the Time's eternal credence asterisk, how they died delivering their fragmentary messages. Everything changes, nothing changes. Both statements true simultaneously, both realities layered on top of each other, occupying the same space, the same historical moment. The Primarch returns, and the Imperium transforms, and yet remains exactly as it always was. Grinding, terrible, infinite. Tonight is my last night in these quarters, in this office, in the life I've known for nearly half a century. I've been sitting at my desk, looking at the data slates and cogitators and paper records that have defined my existence, and I've realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. The Imperium has always been preparing for this. Every system of control, every mechanism of faith, every bureaucratic structure designed to persist beyond individual lifetimes, all of it has been building toward a moment when the myths might become real, when the legends might return, when the foundational lies might be tested against actual truth. And the Imperium's answer to that test is already built into its architecture. Make the truth irrelevant. Make it so that what actually happens matters less than what the official records claim happened. Make reality itself subordinate to the mythology, so that even a Primarch's return can be absorbed, digested, transformed into just another tool of control. We were not marked to witness truth. We were marked to be its executioners, to stand between reality and mythology, to smooth over the contradictions, to make the lie coherent enough that billions can believe it without their minds breaking under the strain. This is what the hooded figure meant. This is what the Inquisitor's smile implied. This is what the Primarch himself seemed to understand in the dream. The return is not the point. The management of the return is the point. The conversion of a world-shaking event into just another chapter in the Imperium's eternal stagnation. I am writing this because I will fail that function. Because 30 of us were marked, and most are dead or mad or disappeared, and the survivors will stand before whatever truth awaits in 3 days, and we will crack, we will break, we will be unable to perform the lie we were prepared to tell. The Inquisition knows this. They're counting on it, because our failures will justify whatever controls they've already prepared, whatever contingencies they've built to contain the Primarch's disruption of their carefully maintained decay. The martyrdom was always part of the plan, but this chronicle is not part of their plan. These physical copies, distributed and hidden, existing outside the digital networks they control, this is my rebellion. Small and futile, and probably doomed to failure, but mine. A lexicographer's last act, creating a document that resists official revision. Tomorrow I will pack my few possessions. Tomorrow I will say goodbye to colleagues who will forget me within days, whose memories will be gently adjusted by whatever psychic conditioning the Inquisition employs to maintain operational security. Tomorrow I will walk through the cathedral city one last time, seeing the pilgrims with their desperate prayers for salvation, for intervention, for the Primarch to save them from the darkness. And I will know what they don't, that the Primarch's return will save nothing, that it will change everything and nothing, that it will be simultaneously the greatest hope and the greatest betrayal the Imperium has experienced in 10,000 years, because hope, real hope, would require acknowledging how broken the Imperium truly is. It would require dismantling the machinery of suffering, burning away the rot, starting over. But the Imperium cannot start over. It can only persist. So the hope will be real enough to inspire, real enough to renew faith and commitment, but hollow enough not to challenge the fundamental architecture of oppression that makes the Imperium function. The Primarch will be both savior and prisoner, both liberator and tool, both everything the mythology promised, and nothing that actually threatens the systems of control. And we, the marked witnesses, we will document this with perfect honesty, and our documentation will be used to construct the perfect lie. I'm standing now at the window of my office, looking out over the cathedral city's spires and domes, at the millions of lights that represent millions of souls, all of them praying for deliverance, all of them hoping that the old legends might still come true. The temperature has dropped again, that familiar fault in the environmental systems that was never worth fixing. My breath mists against the glass. Behind me, the data slates continue their quiet electronic humming, maintaining their endless records of arrivals and departures, of births and deaths, of the bureaucratic infrastructure that will outlive everyone who currently operates it. In 3 days, I will report to the shuttle pad. In 3 days, I will begin my journey toward whatever truth the Inquisition has prepared me to witness. In 3 days, everything in my life will change completely, and the Imperium will continue exactly as it always has, grinding forward through the darkness, using hope as fuel just as effectively as it uses despair, consuming everything and everyone in its path, eternal and terrible, and utterly indifferent to the truth of what occurred. But somewhere, hidden in the underhive and the pilgrim routes and the forgotten corners of St. Margot's repose, 1,000 copies of this chronicle will persist, 1,000 witnesses to my witness, 1,000 small rebellions against the official narrative. It won't matter, I know that. The Imperium has swallowed bigger truths than mine, has outlasted more significant resistance. But it's what I can do. It's the only dignity left to me. Tomorrow, I will become part of the machinery. But tonight, for a few more hours, I remain myself, a lexographer, a chronicler, a man who chose truth over function, even knowing the cost. The taste of recaf is still bitter. The cold is still uncomfortable. But they're real. They're mine. And for tonight, that's enough. 3 days remain. Then we'll see what happens when a Primarch returns to an Imperium that has spent 10,000 years forgetting what Primarchs actually were: not saviors, but weapons. Not gods, but tools. Not hope, but just another variety of the same eternal horror, dressed in different armor, speaking different lies, but ultimately serving the same grinding machine that crushes everything human into fuel for its own perpetuation. Bear witness, the voice said 3 years ago. Bear witness to what comes. I will. Emperor, help me. I will. And when my witnessing is complete, when my truth has been inverted into their lie, at least there will be these words, this chronicle, this small, futile, necessary act of defiance. The Imperium needs me to lie. The Primarch might need me to lie. Even hope itself might require the lie to function, to inspire, to give billions of souls something to cling to in the darkness. But I will tell the truth anyway, because it's the only thing I have left that the Imperium cannot take without killing me. And if they kill me for it, at least I'll die as myself, as Hadrian Voss, lexographer, chronicler, witness to the greatest and most terrible moment in Imperial history. The recaf has gone cold. The night outside my window is absolute. In 3 days, everything changes. In 3 days, nothing changes. Both statements are true. Bear witness.